Hey, what's up, everybody? Today we are looking at game four of our series on Mikhail Botvinnik, the prime years, 1939 to 1940. Botvinnik from the white side for now, and then we're going to go back and look at the black games. So here with the black pieces is Botvinnik's longtime friend and second, Vyacheslav Ragozin. Um, he was a very strong player in his own right. You might be familiar with the Ragozin variation, the Queen's Gambit decline, and he had a few other interesting ideas that he contributed to chess. This game took place as part of a practice match in 1940 in Leningrad. Now, let me just tell you briefly the story behind this match that took place. At this time, some of you history buffs would know that this is around the start of World War II. And at the time, Alexander Alekhine was the world champion. And so, what was going on in the Soviet Union um, at this time was all the strongest players were gathered together, and they were going to play a 10-round tournament, I believe. And the winner of this tournament was to determine who the strongest player was, and then that player was going to be funded and sponsored by the Soviet Union. Um, Provided training, living quarters, etc., in order to challenge Alekhine for the world championship. So, in this particular tournament, took place in Leningrad. Botvinnik was leading halfway through the tournament, and then subsequently had a collapse and wind up finishing in fifth place behind Bondarevsky and Lilienthal. And this is kind of a demerit against Botvinnik, but it happened. Um, and he wrote a letter to a powerful party official in the Soviet Union to basically intervene in 1941. Botvinnik felt that he lost and came in fifth place because of poor playing conditions, right, such as noise, uh, smoke, right, players smoked at the time, etc. So basically, he wanted a reset, so to speak, and he got it. So this match against Ragozin was part of that preparation, right, to get him ready to play in this round robin. So it was basically like the strongest. I think it was six players, uh, the top six in that tournament now. Instead of Botvinnik not getting a chance, he was in the top six since he came in fifth place, and this match was to prepare for that tournament. And of course, he would go on to um, do very well, and the rest is history. He wound up, World War II, of course, breaks out in full scale. Alekhine and Botvinnik never get to play. Alekhine passed away, unfortunately, um, in the midst of all of this. And 1948, a tournament was held to determine the world championship, and Botvinnik would go on to win. But this match is with Ragozin is a part of a practice match. So the game started off D4 from Botvinnik, D5 from Ragozin, C4, C6. So we have the Slav on tap, knight of 3, knight of 6, E3, favorite structure of Botvinnik, G6. And now we're like into Grunfeld territory. Knight of 3, bishop G7, bishop D3, castles, castles. And again, you see this solid formation um, from Botvinnik. Play a very strong center based classical game using the D pawn. Bishop G4, h3, and now Ragozin gives up the bishop here. Queen takes f3, d takes c4, and b takes c4. So now we see white has a preponderance in the center, and we have to give the advantage to white here. Not a big advantage, but we do give the advantage to white here. He has the bishop here. He has pawn preponderance in the center. So now what white wants to do is concentrate, of course, on protecting the d pawn and advancing his own e pawn, right, to e5 if possible, and also be aware of black's potential breakouts in the move c5 and e5. Of course, black would like to stop them completely, but if he can't, he would at least like to make black pay a penalty for these advances. And as you can see, one of the ideas between eliminating the knight on f3 is it weakens the influence of white over the e5 square. Game continued, knight bd7, and as you can see already, black is prepared to play this move e5, and in some cases c5, but here not so much, because with the light square bishop gone, there's a lack of protection on the b7 square. So black is aiming more toward this move e5. Rook d1. Botvinnik anticipates this idea, and again, he realizes he can't stop e5, but what he can do is harass black on the file, perhaps threatening to capture in some instances, and revealing this open file against the queen right here. Ragozin plays e5 anyway, and it's possible because Botvinnik really doesn't want to take here. If he plays d takes e5, then black will equalize immediately at the knight takes e5, because the queen could be captured here with check. So queen e2, for example, queen e7, bishop b3, and then rook fd8, and black has absolutely nothing to worry about here. Perhaps f4, knight d7, e4, but the game is equal for all intents and purposes here. So instead of e5 and capturing here, it was e5, and then Botvinnik played the move d5. And what this does, again, this creates some tension in the position and threatens, of course, to play d6, creating a comfortable wedge in the black position and taking space. Now, here Ragozin played the move c5, so you might say, well, why play c5 and allow this pass pawn situation? Of course, black has the idea to blockade, which would be very good for black. This is nice right here. However, the problem is that right after c5, since this pawn is hanging right here, Botvinnik is able to gain a small initiative and play d6, right? Because he's attacking this pawn here. So therefore, he's able to get away with this move, which allows him complete control over d5. He has and he has this space which hinders black's position severely. So rook b8 in order to protect the pawn. Oh, let me go back. I just wanted to show white's other option here. Excuse me, black's other option. Instead of c5, of course, why not just c takes d5? The problem here is that this pawn is weak since the bishop is gone. So c takes d5, bishop takes d5, and you can see again this double attack on the pawn. So knight takes d5, and then queen takes d5, and again you have double attack on the knight and a double attack on the pawn. So white is going to be a pawn up. So of course, if black could do that, it would be great, but he can't. And again, that's one of the downsides of trading that bishop off so early, that there's no protection here. This is why Ragozin played the move c5. So now d6, rook b8, protecting the pawn here, and then Botvinnik just followed up with the move e4. Bishop g5 is definitely an idea that will come up, because again, black has a lot of problems here with this d5 square being completely dominated by white. And bishop g5 would just add to the misery of that. But before that, knight e8 is played with the idea of just trying to get rid of this pawn. This is a very dangerous pawn and really restricts black's movement in the position. Of course, he would love to play a move like knight e8 and just play, say, queen b6 and just snatch this pawn. But that's easier in theory than in practice. Instead of knight e8, an example could be a6 in order, say, to play b5, and a move like bishop g5 here is possible. But anyway, knight e8 was played, and Botvinnik just continues his development here. Now this is one of those funny positions whereby planning is most important, right? The position is kind of locked up and murky, and there's no like straightforward tactical solution, right? There's no like you know just big um, weakness on the board per se, where black can be exploited immediately. So planning and strategy is going to uh, really be important here as opposed to tactics. So when we look at this position from white's perspective, we see that black really doesn't have too many structural weaknesses, but the weaknesses are more dealing one with this d5 square. That's a big weakness right here. d5 and also this pawn on d6. Those are like the biggest problems in the black position there, right? The weakness of these two squares. We could say that d4 is weak, but it's really not, because at the end of the day, black cannot exploit it. Black's knights are terribly uncoordinated. If one of these knights, they were here, and say the other knight was here and can jump into d4, it would be a different story altogether. But these knights are badly placed, and their bad placement makes it hard for these rooks. But again, with that bad piece placement, it's hard to come up with something tactical in this position. So planning is required. Okay, so we have to look at where we're strong at if we're white. And we have this beautiful pawn that has to be maintained on d6, right? So therefore, we can't just jump in right away with, say, knight d5, because the pawn would drop. Same applies to bishop d5. But we know that we can utilize this square, and it's going to be a major player here. Another point is the pressure, of course, on f7. All right, and the pressure here on c5. So what's going to take place now is basically some maneuvering by Botvinnik with this idea of solidifying the protection on this d6 pawn, and then re-centralizing the queen. So for example, moves like rook d2, rook a d1, queen e2, and just generally trying to wait for the opportunity to be able to utilize this d5 square. So a6 from black, of course, with the idea of playing b5. If he tried queen b6 right away, then tactically that's bad, because knight can just be played to d5, hitting the queen. And then if queen takes d6, then just simply bishop g5 with the threat of bishop e7. And this just doesn't work because of the discovery of this bishop right here. So moves like knight takes f6 with the double check would cause black to resign immediately. So this is why b6, queen b6 was avoided. Another waiting move that black could try is like h6. But again, white could still play what he played in the game. So a4. So black is in a position where he really can't do too much. Okay, he's kind of in a wait and hold scenario here. White has a great position. Bishop here, more space. Um, D5 is open for him to use, but how do you do it? And Botvinnik shows the way here. So rook c8. So we see just some basic shuffling from uh, black here. Rook d2, h6. Again, just kind of waiting around. And rook a d1. So just making sure that the pawn on d6 is not going anywhere. That's like one of the keys to the white position. Knight e f6. And now Botvinnik takes his chance here because the pressure now has been relinquished off of the d6 pawn. This knight is now no longer attacking this pawn and is moved here. So knight d5 is played. And so what's the big deal about knight d5? Well, white has a tangible threat here in knight e7. Right, with this check. So he gets the ball rolling here. And Ragozin plays knight takes d5. He wants to get rid of the powerful piece. And now we see a small initiative develop. Bishop d5. And notice this pawn is attacked. Rook b8. Alright, so a little bit of progress has been made. If b6, then just simply bishop b7, attacking the rook and the pawn on a6. So rook b8. Botvinnik just centralizes the queen. E2. Some variations, he'll come here. King h7 again. Remember, black really has nothing to do, so he's trying not to create weaknesses in the camp. So now that that's done, if you look at this position, now what's the next target for white here? All right, black is kind of holding steady. So it's easy if you think about it. It's this pawn right here. Right, only the knight is guarding it. So the emphasis shifts. Rook c2. And now queen f6. Again, trying to get rid of this pawn desperately is black. And so Botvinnik plays bishop a2. So now this pawn is protected again. That's like the golden nugget there. Ragozin switches and reinforces this pawn here. And now a good strong move by Botvinnik again, seeing the opportunity. Like, how can we make progress in this position right here? We see this knight is hanging here. We had this advanced pawn that's blockaded. Botvinnik decides that this pawn is basically reached its full potential, and he decides to play b4 here. C takes b4, and now rook c7. Again, forcing black's hand here, as the pawn on b7 is attacked and the knight is attacked also. Rook takes c7, and now d takes c7. Dangerous patch pawn, and the knight is hanging. So knight b6, right? Respectable move, guarding the back rank, also the promotion square, and this is why Botvinnik just snatches it off. Bishop takes, queen takes, and now queen c4. So now you see the idea of the centralization. Centralization is important because it leaves the options open. That way, the queen is able to move on either side of the board with great speed. If this queen was still somewhere else on the king side, it might not be able to get over as fast. But since it's relatively close to the center, it can go over to the queen side or the king side if need be. So queen c4 protecting the pawn. Notice also how the pressure is constantly kept here by this bishop and now queen battery. Rook c8, beautiful move. Rook d7, and notice how he gets the most out of the rook. A lot of people would have just played this, right, not thinking. Right, you're protecting the pawn and you're still winning, but it's not as powerful. This move gives you the defensive protection of the pawn, but also gives you the offensive attack. Queen c6, and now it's time to just cash in. Queen takes c6, b takes c6, rook takes f7. So again, pressure, pinning this piece. This guy can't even move here. c5, of course, there's nothing really black can do. And bishop e6, and Ragozin was forced to resign. All he can do is play rook takes c7, rook takes c7, and these pawns aren't going anywhere. I love that game because it's not spectacular. It's just like a regular looking chess game, and it shows the strength of Botvinnik. Just the power of planning. Just looking at the position, right? He didn't have much in the position to work with. He had some space, right? The d6 pawn was very powerful. He made sure that was protected, and he kept that advantage pretty much the whole game until the end. And he was able to utilize the d5 square against the opponent. Everything revolved around those two things. All right, and along the way, he was able to provoke some weaknesses in the opponent, and he exploited the little tactical opportunities when he had the chance, such as making moves like b4, realizing it's time to sacrifice a pawn so that his rooks can penetrate into the position, etc., etc. And he utilized the better coordination of his pieces, right, to um, bring home the full point here. So hope you enjoyed that game. We're gonna, of course, continue in the series. I'm gonna put this on the playlist, so therefore it's convenient for everybody. You can just go through the playlist, and also please comment below. I like hearing your comments. Um, and suggestions. I also would like you to click the buttons down there to subscribe and like and thumbs up, because it helps move the video up in the algorithm so that my videos can be seen when somebody searches in, chess or something like that. And please support my channel via donation. I would appreciate that tremendously. I don't care if it's a quarter or a dollar or $500 or $5,000. Like, I would definitely be thankful, especially in this time. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope that I try to make it clear as possible. And I want to say one more thing about Botvinnik, is that Botvinnik is a great example to learn chess from, because his play is really logical. If you're that type of player, type of thinker, like the moves make sense. They're easy to, especially when you get stronger. Like, you look at his games and you can say, oh, I can do that. I can play like that. It's the consistency, of course, that's required, but the moves aren't complicated. Like, this game wasn't complicated, but he won in 32 moves with real simple and logical chess. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you on the next video.